Welcome everyone to the Keeping Your Business Together in a Crisis live stream webinar series. This is part 8 of the series titled Discovering Opportunities with Government Contracts. We're recording this session at 10 a.m. on Wednesday, May 13th. This series is produced by the Boulder Small Business Development Center to support businesses in Boulder County as well as the rest of the state through our TechSource program. And we're one of 15 SBDCs in Colorado. All the SBDCs provide consulting, workshops, and connections to resources. So if you're dialing in from someplace like Gunnison, just know that there's an awesome SBDC near you that you can reach out to for support. Our center is hosted by the City of Boulder, and we're we're part of this awesome network of local, state, and national strategic partners that can help you during these challenging times. So each week, we are doing a topic. We're looking for topics that are relevant during these times. And so this week, we really wanted to have someone talk about different distribution channels, particularly with the government, because there is money there, and it can be a great opportunity for new sales streams. It's a really awesome time to reinvent yourself or consider things that you may not have considered before to try to generate revenue, in interesting times. So please note that we do have everyone on mute, and we'll take questions at the end. My co-moderator, Jamie Brandis, will do the Q&A session. But if you came on board with a question, or if you have something that you're thinking of while Andre's speaking, go ahead and put that in the chat, and she'll ask that after Andre speaks. We are recording this session, so don't feel like you have to grab everything in, within this hour. We'll post it on our website, which is bouldersbdc.com, and we'll also send you a link tomorrow. And I just wanted to say that we are so lucky to have Andre Hargrave today. He is one of my all-time favorite people. He has worked with the SBDC network across the country. His list of credentials is a mile long, and he is the owner of Global Sales Advisors. I literally learn something new every time that I listen to Andre speak, and he's also a subject matter expert for Boulder SBDC and a consultant. So if you need a session with him, you can go to bouldersbdc.com and register and request some time. And Jamie's going to cover that at the end as well. So I'm going to turn this over to Andre because he's got some good stuff to talk about. And again, thanks so much for being here, Andre. Take it away.
Thank you.
Andre, can you?
Okay, can you see my screen?
Better.
Is that better? All right. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Andre Hargrave, and today we're going to be talking about tips for sourcing, qualifying, and targeting governmental opportunities. So, one of the things I like to always preface it with individuals is my world is actual business development. And since it's business development, you may hear me say or position topics a little bit differently than, say, if you went to an agency and you spoke to that agency, you talked to people within the agency who may or may not ever have sold to the very agency that they represent. So the way that I speak about topics may be a little bit different. So just bear with me and glean out the conversation what you can get, and I'm quite sure we'll get done. So the first thing I like to do is I like to let everyone know what my experience is, where I've been, what I've done, so you'll know my point of view. So, of course, I'm a military veteran, disabled, 7 years active, 2 years Army National Guard. I started Global Sales Advisors back in 1999. Before that, I owned a sales company when I exited the military. I've been the federal procurement consultant for the Department of Transportation, Small Business Resource, which me and another team brought here years ago. The Director of Certification for the Rocky Mountain Minority Supplier Development Council. So that was on the corporate side of targeting corporate opportunities through certification. I was the state veterans representative for several years for the Small Business Development Center. And some of the other things you can see, I'm still CDOT consultant for the Colorado Department of Transportation. And I'm also still emerging leaders instructor, boost the business, and so on. So today's content, in my mindset, what I like everyone to understand is I'm going to give you a lot of information because I feel that once you leave this webinar, you should have information that you can actually use today. Not theory, but actual application. So what we're going to discuss today is first things first, we're going to get some basic questions out of the way. These are questions that people ask me all the time. And then we're going to talk about the methods of governmental business development, origination versus solicitation. Then we're going to talk about the top 5 reasons an RFP or RFQ is lost, because a lot of people don't realize why they lose, or even if they were really in contention. We're going to talk about qualified solicitation for just the basics. So that's basically, how do you know if a solicitation has been wired, scoped, or any of those kind of things, or even positioned on you didn't know it. So we'll discuss those terms a little bit. We're going to go through a few of the basic federal portals, and then we're going to go through a few of the basic Colorado procurement portals so that you all can go after opportunities right now. Now, what we won't do is we won't go into the actual RFQs or RFPs. There's a lot of little tips and tricks that we can do with those to gather information and all of that. So, if you reach out to the Boulder SBDC, I can sit down with you. Well, in these times, we'll do a video conference call or some other element to kind of bring you up to speed on some of the things we're going to talk about.
Hey, Andre,
so first things,
can you bring the phone a little closer to you, because it gets a little muffled sometimes.
Okay, how about this?
Better, thank you.
That's better? All right. So, first things first. Are governmental agencies still purchasing? This is a question I get quite often. And the answer is yes, they're always purchasing. And let me tell you why they're always purchasing. Governmental agencies are like little mini cities. So if you think about any county, municipality, or any of the infrastructure agencies that are within those agencies, they always have to function. And agencies, contrary to popular belief, don't make anything other than policy and legislation. So everything else they purchase, everything from pencils, pens, automobiles, gas, all of those things are always purchased. So agencies are even purchasing during economic downturn. So governmental agencies are one thing that are always purchasing in one form or another. Do I need to be certified to target these opportunities? Awesome question. And the answer is varied. It depends on the agency, and it also depends on the certifications that you're targeting. So I'll give you an example. If you're targeting federal opportunities, you may want to be 8A certified, HUBZone, Service-Disabled Veteran, Women-Owned, or if you're Native American, you also want to be registered as a Native American, so in the Biennium Act. But if you're targeting municipal agencies, those agencies rarely take certifications, if any, and that would be for another class, but we would talk about budgeting and budget allocations and those kind of things which the certification rides on. So, but for the most part, it really depends on which agencies you're targeting. Will certifications help? To follow on with the initial question, and the answer is absolutely. Absolutely, they'll help if we're targeting the right agency with the right certification, and you understand how that certification works. Which certifications will help the most? This is one I constantly get. People will come to me and say, Andre, should I get 8A certification? Should I get a HUBZone? And we can dive into that a little bit more in the Q&A. But then the answer is, well, are you targeting agencies that are receptive to those certifications? So if you're 8A certified and you're HUBZone certified, and you're targeting, let's say, the State Department, which doesn't necessarily give the highest preference to certain certifications, then it may not be as helpful. But we can go into that a little bit later. Should I start with local, state, or federal agencies? That's a really, really good question. And the truth is, it depends on what you're most comfortable with. Some people are very, very comfortable targeting agencies at the highest level, and a lot of people are not. A lot of people are not comfortable sitting in a conference room with, 10, 15 different individuals, and I'll be gentle and say bureaucrats, sitting in a room, and that's their job. Their job is to watch over the taxpayer dollars. Do you feel comfortable with that? Do you know how to communicate? Very, very important. Or at the local level, you look out your window and you see some city construction workers out there, and do you feel comfortable going to talk to those guys? I've known a lot of people who've won work just by walking up to people and going, hey, you all are doing this. Where do you get your equipment from? And they'll say, well, you need to talk to Jane or John or whoever, and they'll get a deal. But you can't build a business off of that. So let's keep that in mind. Should I target prime or subcontracting opportunities? Everybody wants to know that. I received an email this morning from an actual client of mine who asked that very same question. So with my firm, we only target prime contracts. We don't really do subcontracting. I can bring in someone to actually perform that subcontracting outreach, but primarily to work with a firm like mine, we're looking at targeting the prime contract. But to answer this question, it depends on what you're comfortable with. Are you comfortable working with the agency, filling out all the paperwork, keeping all the crossing your T's and dotting your I's? Or do you just want to come out and do the work? Do you want to go to the project site or turn on your computer and do the work and have somebody else deal with the federal government or state government? That's the question. Also, when we're actually marketing to entities, doing subcontracting is really a business-to-business sale. A lot of people don't realize that even if the agency that you're subcontracting on is a large agency, and let's say you're working through a Fortune-level corporation, a Ball Aerospace, a Lockheed, you are a subcontractor to Ball or Lockheed, even though they have the federal contract. So even though that in use is the agency, it's a business-to-business sale. And a lot of people are very comfortable with business-to-business, but may not be comfortable with business-to-government. Now, when I'm sitting down with people and talking to people, one of the things I really like them to understand is that there's only two disciplines here. There's only two. You're either going to originate the opportunity or you're going to respond to a solicitation that the agency has decided it wanted to purchase. Those are the only two. So for the average company, especially the micro company, we have very limited bandwidth. So we have to decide, are we going to originate, which means we're going to pick up the phone, we're going to go to events, we're going to do webinars, we're going to do something to get in front of that agency and get their attention, or are we going to target solicitation, which is an art in itself. So solicitations happen when the agency has decided that it wants to requisition a particular product or service. And at any given time, there's thousands upon thousands of solicitations floating in different platforms, and we'll discuss that a little bit later. But that's a decision that you have to make. For this argument and for this webinar, we're going to be talking about the solicitations. And there's different types of solicitations. I actually have a class where we kind of talk about the different types of solicitations, such as RFPs, requests for proposals, RFQs, requests for quotes, requests for information, invitations to bid, foreign tenders. There's all kind of RFP or solicitation. But they all have one thing in common. And that one thing in common is we have to be able to write to that solicitation to be able to get that contracting officer's attention or buyer and let them know that we're qualified to perform the work. But with that said, some of the agencies that you would have to write an RFP or response, a bid response to, are municipal agencies like cities, counties, townships, school districts, libraries, as you see there, major corporations. A lot of people don't realize all major corporations release solicitations. Nonprofit organizations, and here's my favorite, quasi-governmental agencies. People go, what is a quasi-agency? And that's an agency that may be up under a governmental charter or may be receiving funding from governmental organizations or budgetary allocation. So your telephone company, oil and gas, water, electric, light, those are all quasi-governmental organizations that follow a charter, either state or regional or local charter. So they are required to have competition when they purchase. And that's what a solicitation is actually used for, is to garner that competition. And if you look at it from that aspect, then it really tends to make sense. So an agency releases a solicitation because they need the competition. The competition is used to justify who's the best candidate and what is the best price for that product or service. And if you understand those two concepts, your win ratios go up exponentially. So a lot of times as a small business, and I remember almost 23, 24 years ago, when we used to target solicitations, we would think, oh, we got the best service, we got the best product, we're going to do this. But that wasn't what it was about. It was about when we submitted our bid response, did we show that we were the best organization for that particular allocation? Yes or no? And if we were, could they afford it? Or is there someone who did similar that was cheaper? So just keep those in mind if you decide to go after governmental opportunities, and that would help you go a lot further than you would just blindly submitting bids. So with that said, on the screen you now see the top 5 reasons an RFP is lost. There's actually more, and it's a class that I do present, but let's talk about this for a second. One of the biggest reasons that an RFP is lost is because of the technical aspect. So if you read on the screen, it says, fail to explain how to perform the work. Let's just stop there. And I'm smiling. If you can't see me, I'm smiling right now. Because what a lot of people don't understand is when you tell me I have a glass of water sitting on my desk. If you ask me to move my glass of water from one side of my desk to the other side of the desk, I'll say, okay. If I was to write that, I say, I picked it up, moved it to the other side, put it down. All right. I did not explain how I moved that glass of water. I did not explain how I extended my arm, opened my fingers, applied enough pressure to grip the glass, exerted pressure to lift, moved over 3 feet, started to release the pressure to lower the glass. That's how you write an RFP. Your technical aspect has to explain that to the point where, because that contracting officer isn't a relative expert on what you do. Even though it may go to a bid committee, it's got to first get through contracting, right? The second element in which RFPs are often lost is in the costing, which is your pricing. And pricing can be very, very complicated. When we start talking about loaded rates with your insurance and your taxes and travel and per diem and all of that, costing can be very, very complicated. And there's people like myself who that's all they specialize in is in costing. But for this argument, we're going to keep it relatively simple. So when we talk about pricing, a lot of companies losing their pricing. And being in this business for over 25 years, I've learned one of the things that I often hear that lets me know if we're going to be too high or not. And what I often hear someone say is, we're not the cheapest. We're the best, but we're not the cheapest. Well, if you're not the cheapest, there's certain type of solicitations you can't go after because it's going to ask for the lowest price technically acceptable. And if that's the case, granted, you are the best, but you're not going to win. And I know there's always an example of someone said, hey, we weren't the cheapest, but we won anyway. That's okay. But for this argument, let's just stay within the rules and regs for a second. Another reason people don't win is they're non-compliant. And it's super easy to be non-compliant. So easy that a lot of people don't realize it. The solicitation could say, we want recycled paper, and we want that recycled paper to be 70% recycled. And you give me 50% recycled paper. you are non-compliant with the specs of this solicitation. Or it could be, we want 12 pitch font, and we want it to be Roman, Times Roman. And you say, well, I don't really like Times Roman because I don't like what it looks like, so I'm going to give you Arial or something to that effect. You are non-compliant. And at that particular point in time, you do not pass go. And these are some of the things that really hem up small businesses because we're not necessarily professional proposal writers. I write a lot of proposals, but I don't consider myself a proposal writer for the simple fact that I'm not what we call a wordsmith in the industry. I can't take technical jargon and put it in user-friendly terminology. That's just not my forte. So I don't consider myself a proposal writer, even though I still win my share of proposals, even when I write the bid. Sometimes we're just not qualified to do the work, which is number 4. Amazing. We're just not qualified. And what we mean by not qualified, I'm not talking about putting nail to hammer or hammer to nail, right? That's where it shows you how technically aspect I am on construction. But we're not qualified. And what we mean by we're not qualified, yeah, we may or may not have a performance history, depending on the size of the deal and what they're asking for. Or it could be something as, can you finance this deal? Maybe you just can't finance it. You know, do you have the bonding requirement? Do you have the qualified references or other requirements? So I've seen solicitations where they say, we want you to have 3 years of experience. Okay, I got that. We want you to be able to bond to a certain requirement. Yes, I have that. But we want you to have at least 2 years of experience working with this agency. Guess what? I am not qualified. And there's nothing you can do to change that qualification. Absolutely nothing. And there's some reasons they would put that in there. We won't go into that during this webinar. But when we start talking about solicitations that are wired or shaped for someone else, and there's a whole science behind that, and we can kind of talk about that. And then finally, the incumbent gets to rebid. Oh, most people lose a deal before they even write their bid response because that particular opportunity has went to the same incumbent, which we would call a legacy incumbent, the last 3 deals. The last 3 deals, the same individual, the same company won the solicitation. They're an incumbent. They're a legacy incumbent. And how are we going to displace those guys? You're not going to displace them on cost. I know a lot of people feel we can come in cheaper. Not going to do that. You can say, well, we have technology that we can make this work better through our technology. Well, did the solicitation ask for your technology? No, it did not. It asked for what the incumbent has been doing. So what we normally do is we'll pick up the phone, call the buyer, contracting officer, or purchaser, and we'll say, how many times has this been rebidded? You know, is this a reallocation? Is there an incumbent? Can that incumbent rebid? Is that incumbent certified? Oh, is it under the same certification or contracting vehicle? So, and the reason we do this is because every time you write a bid response, it costs you money. You have to pay someone, even if you're doing it yourself, you have your own time allocations that you have to put forth for this solicitation. So we qualify as much as we can up front to decide if we're going to put the team together to even go after these types of solicitations. The next step that we're going to do, the next thing that we're going to take a look at is we're going to take a look at qualified leads. What is a qualified lead? All right. So everyone in here is now a procurement professional, and we're looking at solicitations to go after. What happens a lot of times is we'll find a solicitation that says, hey, we need some data entry. Use it as an example. Just about everybody on this call can do data entry, I would dare suspect, right? We pull a solicitation and we say, okay, we can do this, and then we start pulling our team together. But is that solicitation qualified? Have you qualified? Has your sales team qualified? Let me give you just a few examples of what I mean by qualified. First thing, I have my people ask the contracting individuals, why is this agency releasing this solicitation? There's a reason. They didn't do it out the goodness of their heart. They did it for a reason. And I've had conversations with contracting officers where I said, Hey, out of pure curiosity, why are you all releasing this solicitation? Oh, the incumbent wants a price increase and we have to justify the price increase. Oh, totally blew my mind. I couldn't believe they told me that. But guess what? Saved me a lot of time and effort. Another question we'll ask is, how are the bid responses rated? Right? Because we need to know, how are we going to be scored? Because every bid response is a numbers game. It's about your points and how many points you accumulate. So we need to know if the technical response has the most points or is weighted the most. Is it the pricing? Is it the performance history? Or is it the social economic status? We need to know because we're going to write towards those. If it's the pricing, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about I'm minority, service-disabled veteran, this, that, and the other. We won't discuss that. But if it's pricing, I need to know nuance where the pricing point was before. And can we even be competitive? Saves you a lot of time and energy on the back end if you know that in the front. What are the requirements to respond to the document? This is kind of tricky because if you're going after state solicitation, a lot of times there's a lot of extra documents that you have to fill out. You may have to fill out a non-lobbying requirement. You may have to fill out an intent to respond or an intent to bid. And if you do solicitations in other states, you'll run into these documents quite often. And a lot of times they have to be submitted before you submit your response. You have to let the agency know you're going to bid before you bid, right? So you may have to register with that state and register with that bid board or portal before you can do anything else. But these are very important things. You may, if it's a federal deal, you're probably going to have to do your representative, your certs and reps document. You're going to have to fill that out, right? So there's all these different things that you may have to do. Are there opportunities to speak with the program manager or end user? Okay. We can stop this webinar right now, and I can ask you, how many people out there, when you're going after solicitation, do you speak to the program manager or end user? There are strategies to get to them, but we won't discuss that right now. But ask yourself that. So we just went after a solicitation, and we won it for my client last Thursday. We won, and it was with Fort Benning, Georgia. So the question was, can we get to the program manager or end user? If not, can we get our questions answered? Very, very, very important. If you can't get those basic questions asked, so this one, I'll give you a great example. One that we're going to submit today after this webinar, we submitted to the Department of Homeland Security for some containers, shipping containers. And the question is so simple. Do we need to paint the shipping containers? That's a simple question, but nobody can answer that. Here's why we have to ask that question. Because in the solicitation, it said that the containers need to be beige, right? If you drive around anywhere, you see shipping containers, you usually don't see a lot of beige ones. So they have to be painted. So the question is, who assumes the cost of the painting? Us, or do we put it in the solicitation? Buyer can't answer that. So we have to get to a program manager or end user to figure that out. So the last question, the qualifying question that we're just going to address right now is the solicitation by local, by American, by Indian, or some other buying preference? So we target a lot of opportunities in Wyoming. We're in Colorado. A lot of times in Wyoming, in the print, it'll say preference by local, 5%, 3%. We're dealing with that with a printing deal right now. 5% by local preference. Now, then I have to ask myself, can we get our prices first low enough to be able to compete? Then can I get my pricing low enough to offset that 3 or 5% by local preference? And the answer may be no. And if you can't, there's nothing wrong with walking away from a solicitation. Absolutely nothing. I've picked up the phone and called agencies and said, hey, there's a buy local preference here. What does that mean, even though I read it? And they'll say, well, that's buy local. We try to award contracts to agencies local, to companies local. I say, okay. And they'll say, well, but if you hire someone local, then that qualifies as buy local. Gotcha. Right? So I know if I win the solicitation, I just need to have somebody local to make that preference of that local buy. So those things are very important. What if it says buy American? Had to deal with this one. Buy American, a lot of times the end product has to be assembled, manufactured in America, not the core product, but the end product. Very important to understand. Very, very important. And I'm quite sure quite a few people out there can hear me getting all excited, but this is what I do for a living. So I like to share the information that, has helped me sustain over all these years and just kind of really help people understand how this is done. And before we get into the next part of where do we find these solicitations and how do we kind of qualify them and that, I have to make sure we're good on time because the next portion that I'm going to talk about is really a time saver, a huge, huge time saver. So a lot of times when companies come to me, and since I'm in the state of Colorado, we're going to look at the local portals. I look at portals from all over the United States, and I'm going to share with you how complicated it can be, but it's fun, right? So when we talk about bid portals, there's different types. Where do I find a solicitation? Well, agencies are required to advertise solicitations within reason. So I'll give you an example. In the Federal Acquisition Act, there's an actual paragraph that states contracting officers must make the effort, key phrase, effort to advertise a solicitation. Now, they don't say where, right? They don't say it has to be on FedBizOpps. And many of you out there know FedBizOpps, which is an advertising portal. It doesn't say that. It says it has to make the effort to advertise. So it could be in the newspaper, it can be online, it can be on FedBizOpps or some other portal, and there's hundreds of portals. It's not thousands of portals. It can be, I remember years and years and years ago at a local base here, I'm not going to mention it because those guys are great, they would actually, their small buys, they would take them and pin them up in the hallway on a bulletin board. So unless you were actually on the base or facility, you never saw those opportunities. Never. But they made the requirement to advertise. So the only ones who would ever pick up those smaller opportunities that were non-formal, simplified non-formal, were the people who worked there. That's understanding the rules. And if you understand the rules of how this works, the world changes for you. It does. Your win ratio goes up. You have more fun. There's less pressure on salespeople to perform when you understand these rules. But when we talk about bid portals, there's different types that do different things and they're designed to do different things. They can be free, or they can be thousands, tens of thousands of dollars a year, depending on the other information that's gathered with that particular solicitation. So when we talk about bid portals, we basically are talking about three different types. We're talking about scraping websites. And a scraping website, I'll start there, is a website that goes out and it crawls around to other websites and it pulls out opportunities by your keyword searches or your industry code that you put in. And I've listed a few there. And just so you know, I've used everything that's on the screen. As far as I'm concerned, everything is great. It just depends on what you're using it for. So a scraping website is going to go out and it's going to say, hey, there's something going on in Erie, Colorado, where I'm located. Pull it, let you be able to see the heading of it, but to be able to pull that actual solicitation, you're still going to have to come down to Erie, Colorado, not come down, but log on to the Erie, Colorado purchasing site to pull that solicitation. It just scrapes the information for you to review it. The next type of website is advertising websites, and there's thousands of these. If you consider FedBizOpps is an advertising website. It's stagnant. You can't bid on it, even though they're trying to change it with the new system and all of that. Okay, I give them a C+ for effort, right? But as far as usability, a lot of times the FBO will then send you to an actual bid site, a bid site like Fed Connect or Unisom Marketplace for you to actually bid on. Or it may even send you to the Defense Logistics Agency bid site to actually bid. So understanding what kind of site you're on and how much time you're spending how much of your time you're spending on those sites, very, very important. And a lot of times when I talk to governmental salespeople, I can tell how much they know by the events they go to and where they get their solicitation. Those two singular things, I can tell how qualified you are as a governmental procurement person. Now, one of the other sites that we're going to talk about is the intelligence site, the intelligence portal. And I mentioned some right here. I've used them all. We'll use some of them. EasyGovOps, GovWin, GovTribe, Unbiased. And what these sites do is they give you the supporting data for the solicitation, where FBO does not. So where the opportunity may originate out of FBO and then pulled into these portals, those portals will then supply you with the original solicitation, the contracting officer, and a history of the buy, especially if it's an IDIQ indefinite delivery contract or something like that, the history of those purchases, which is very important depending on the size of the deal that you're going after. Very, very important. Some websites, intelligence sites, I would not use to go after $100,000. It's just overkill. But if I'm going after a 1.2, 1.5, yeah, I need to know. I need to know who we're playing with. I need to know who I'm playing against. So those things are very important. So one of the other things we're going to do is we're not going to get into these sites because we just don't have the time, and I want to open it up to Q&A. And I just want to share with you some of the things that I try to educate companies on so we can win, because that's why we're in this game, so to say, to actually win. So FBO, Fed BizOps, and I'll tell you a funny story real quick. So many years ago, Fed BizOps, Federal Business Opportunity Site, is what the actual website name was. It was, you call it FBO, but it was Fed BizOps. And so a few years ago, the government decided to change the name of the website to FBO instead of Fed BizOps, because you used to have to type in Fed BizOps. So for years, the website was still called FBO, and you still had to type in FBO, or Fed BizOps, even though when you went on it, it just said FBO. And a lot of people don't know that history, but it just kind of shows you how sometimes our government reacts before it's actually ready. So it took it about 4 or 5 years before they actually made the official change, even though you could see it on screen. It's just kind of a funny thing. But it's an advertising site. It's designed to illustrate what these agencies are purchasing. It makes it easy for the agency to actually advertise. And if you've ever spoken to a small business liaison officer or contracting officer or other individuals who are responsible for purchasing or allocation, they will say, we put everything on Fed BizOps. Okay, here we go. Only about 73% of what can go on Fed BizOps actually shows on Fed BizOps. Did you know that? The rest of it goes on individual portals such as, you have DLA, they advertise their stuff. You have stuff that even shows up on Fed Connect that may not show up on FBO. You have different types of portals such as Seaport or something like that. And those opportunities may not show up on Fed BizOps. I just wanted to share that with you so you'll know. So next time someone says, we put everything on FBO, do this. Thank you. I appreciate that information. We review Fed BizOps all the time. But can I ask you this? How do you all do allocations under $25,000? Do you all put that on Fed BizOps? And they'll say, no, we don't put that on Fed BizOps. That's handled by the department. You really have to contact the department. There you go. There's you get out of jail. They just told you where you need to go. So then what we would do is follow up and say, well, okay, great. Who would I talk to? Is there a point of contact for that particular department? And we can talk about that if we sit down and actually have a consulting session or those kind of things. Then we have Fed Connect, Government Acquisition and Grant. And then we have Unisom Marketplace. which is a reverse auction site. It is a different game. It is the lowest price wins 95% of the time, if not more. And you really have to have a strong constitution to be able to do reverse auction. So the next one that we're going to talk about a little bit, there's other portals, as I stated. Here's just a few. So we have GSA, General Services Administration, eBuy system. And here's the thing, with eBuy, you actually have to be on schedule, on a GSA schedule, to be able to see what's in that portal. Henceforth, you won't see it on FedBizOpps. You'll only see it in eBuy. Here's the Defense Logistics Agency site. You may see some things in FedBizOpps, but to be able to get that information, to get those specs, you got to go to the Defense Logistics Agency site to be able to get that. Here's Seaport. If you're on the Seaport IDIQ or GWAC, Government-Wide Acquisition Contract, you got to go to Seaport E to be able to see those opportunities. They're not going to show up on FBO, right? So understanding the true system is how you have to navigate the contracting world. And people will say, well, that's the federal, we're not state. You know, we're doing stuff at the state level. Here's the amazing thing. A lot of states have BPAs, blanket purchase agreement. If you're not on that BPA, you don't get to play. It's just, you just don't get to play. In the state of Colorado, we have what we call cooperative agreements. So if you go to the state site and look up something, it may be on a cooperative agreement. And so that's something that we can also discuss. And so from there, we actually get into the individual portals. And this is the information you can see. I believe Jamie's going to keep this information up, or you'll be able to get it downloaded. These are the major portals that are in the state of Colorado, and a few of the federal ones that you can also see too. So I don't want to necessarily go into those right now because they'll eat up a lot of time. But I would like to open it up for questions, Q&A, if that's okay with the team.
Absolutely. So thank you, Andre, for doing all of that. I think it's helpful to see these screens and what people need to be looking for. We do have several questions. So we have about 18 minutes for questions. So I'll get to those now. There's a few questions regarding being certified as a minority or women-owned business. So one of them is, are there set-asides specifically for minority or women-owned businesses in the state?
In the state. So the short answer is yes. Yes, there are. So when we look at the state, and let's not confuse the state with city and county. So when we talk about more at the municipal level, under state, we get into the capital city of any state. And those capital cities actually control the social economic status or certification. So ours is the city and county of Denver. And the city and county of Denver has women and minority small businesses as far as the certification is concerned. There's others. But to answer this question is yes. Now, when we talk about at the municipal level, we don't necessarily use the term set aside anymore. We use more preference, or we'll say, and you will hear the word set aside, you know, to be able to go after this, you need to be women certified, or you need to be MBE certified at the city and county of Denver. So those are the terms you will hear, and there is work that's allocated out for those individuals. So that does happen, and you do see that. But what you'll see more of is you'll see a requirement to utilize women and minority businesses as part of a larger contract. So there will be an allocation, say a construction contract, and up to 18% of that has to go to a women-owned business or a minority-owned business. It's W/MBE for the city and county of Denver. To answer that question.
Okay, so along those lines too, someone was awarded an RFP for a local government agency in their particular field. And based on the RFP as a minority women-owned business enterprise, they were supposed to have priority bidding on projects, but they were never informed by the agency when the projects came up. And they're wondering if there's a way to hold the agency accountable.
Yes, there is a way. Trust me, you don't want to do it, right? So you're much better off is the responsibility is our responsibility as certified companies to monitor and track. The agency has no requirement whatsoever to inform us of any opportunities as an individual company, as an individual entity. They don't have that requirement. So the bigger question is if that allocation was put out and it was not put out as a woman slash MBE opportunity. So if it was supposed to be allocated out that way and it wasn't, then we have some recourse. You may not want to fight that battle, right? But there's always a recourse. But for small companies, I really suggest that we don't get into those kind of matches with the different agencies because we don't want to create enemies, so to say. But if you feel like you've been wronged or some justice has been lacking there are things you can do. You just have to be prepared to maybe get counsel and actually, go in and fight that determination if that's what you want to do. If I have more specifics, I'll be able to give you a better answer. So a lot of times it's written in the solicitation. It may say this is allocated out to a woman or minority-owned firm, or let me give you a better one, a DBE certified entity, right? But then also in the solicitation, it says unless one cannot be, they use a different term, but unless one can't be found, right? That's the caveat. So a lot of things are local bias for the state of Colorado or any state. You may see go out of state because the argument is we can't find local qualified companies to perform that work, even though you're sitting there. And that's just a marketing effort. But I'm happy to pursue that more if you want to go to the Small Business Development Center, and we can take a look at that.
Great. Thanks, Andre. I also just wanted to mention to everyone that we do partner pretty closely with the Minority Business Office. So they do help with certifications and, navigating some of those types of things. And, if you are a minority or women-owned business, we're happy to get you connected there as well for any additional resources that you might need. So let's see, we have another question here. And they're saying it seems like the system in place excludes small businesses and newcomers. So is it a fair assessment? And if so, is it worthwhile to even make a bid?
Okay. All right. This is tough. So the first thing I'm going to say is usually what a lot of us small businesses confuse is we confuse small business with micro business. So when the government's talking about small business, most of the time they're not really talking about us. They're not talking about micro business. So when you look at the SBA size standard, give an example for my size standard marketing 541613, size standard is $15 million. So talking to a company that under a couple of $1 million is probably not who they're referring to. So there are barriers to entry. So the barriers to entry could be something as simple as the agency would say, here's our qualifying elements. If you fit these qualifying elements, we want to talk to you. If you don't fit these qualifying elements, when you do fit them, come talk to us. And I've heard that situation being articulated in that kind of way. But the thing is when we as micro businesses, we have to find the softest point of entry into the agency. We can't compete against, give an example, I'm very, very specialized, but I can't compete against a $10 million marketing firm. I just can't. So if I'm trying to compete against that $10 million marketing firm, I'm going to be like the individual who just wrote in and say, well, it seems like they don't want me to play. They're not breaking these deals small enough where I can help, where I can win them. They're not returning my phone call. I'm not IBM. They're not returning my phone call. But if we look at it and say, okay, within the city and county of Denver, let's say HUD, Denver Housing. And I go talk to Denver Housing in its own entity, right, at its own location. And they say, well, we have these little things you can do. Are you capable of doing any of those? Yes. I can do a $100,000 deal. I can do a $300,000 deal. And I'm in. I just can't do a larger contract. So understanding how the game is really played is something that I really try to hone in on when I sit down with companies, and I get an idea of who you have spoken with, what they've said, and what that meant, which is very, very important. Because there could be something in between the lines that we didn't hear, right? If the agency said, yeah, we have a solicitation coming out, such and such, go on Bid Direct, and you'll see it when it's released. Okay, you wait a month, it comes out, solicitation comes out, you don't qualify, and you've just spent all your time setting yourself up for failure. You know, with small companies, we keep it simple. We have a very high win ratio with simplified small companies, right? So I would love to talk to that individual about the way to penetrate into the agency.
Fantastic. So right now there's cash flow issues and, people really looking for alternative sources of funding. So I guess how long do you think it really takes to, from when you go to bid to when you're actually awarded a contract to when you actually get money?
Okay, this is great because I'm dealing with this right now on a deal that we won. So we won the opportunity. And this is federal. We haven't received our 1449, which is our contract that we signed to say we're going to perform this thing. And so I called the agency and I said, hey, when are we going to get our 1449? We're chomping at the bit. And the agency said, well, it could be 30 days. It could be 45 days, depending. And that's what the answer was. Now, my response was, okay, great. I appreciate that. The reason I asked because, we really want to do a good job. We want to get things moving, and then the agency came back and said, well, a lot of times it's shorter than 30 days, right? So I got them to come in a little bit. So then I was like, okay, great. Hey, I truly appreciate that. I just want to let my team know because, we got to keep ourselves together and move forward. And then they just reiterated, but strongly, it'll be less than 30. But that's the best I can get, right? So average, it can be anywhere from 30 to 45 days on small deals. It could be 6 months. It can be a year on large structured deals, right? Large infrastructure deals. It could be a year plus, year and a half. But you're building in the millions of dollars. So as a small business or a micro business, it's safe to say 30 days will probably be your start or delivery date. And from that time of you invoicing correctly, I emphasize invoice correctly, you could have a 15-day pay, 20-day pay, 45-day pay, depending on what you all agree to and the agency itself. And how they pay you differs. Some agencies send me checks. I have one agency that pays me through PayPal. I have another agency that deposits the money directly into my account at this time every month and a half. Well, every month and a half. That money's in the bank. Don't have to worry about it. Right? So it really kind of depends on the agency that you're dealing with and how long you can, go out before receiving payment. I will tell the individual this. If you are a subcontractor, you're at the mercy of the prime contractor. And it's not too much the agency can do as long as that prime contractor pays its sub. So I know a lot of agencies, a lot of goodwill. They try to get their prime contractors to pay the smaller companies quicker, but they're limited to what they can do. But I will tell you this, agencies pay. So don't ever let a prime contractor tell you, we haven't gotten paid. it's been 6 months. And if they do say that, and it could happen, oh, how come you haven't gotten the remittance yet? Is your invoice get rejected? Oh, no, our invoice didn't get rejected. We just haven't gotten paid. Flag. That's a flag, right? So those are little nuanced things you'll learn with it.
Okay. So in your experience, have you found that it's easier to get local or state contracts rather than federal? Or I guess, what does the success rate look like in those different areas?
Okay. So that's a great question. So locally, you can build a relationship, right? And if we want to talk about that direct award work, or we want to talk about that sole source work, it's a little easier to get that. Let's say you're not certified. And that's where I start with, even if you're a highly certified company, I look at it, if you're not certified, who do we have a relationship with? And let me preface relationship. Sometimes we take these relationships too far. We'll see the same people every month, year after year, 2 years down the road, they haven't won anything. You've taken that relationship too far, right? Now, if your strategy is to build relationships to win work, local is the best way to do it. If you can win through solicitation by, having submitting a great bid response, then the world is your oyster at that point, right? But for most small companies, we need two things. We need the opportunity to be simple, and then we need some insider inside the agency to help us when we get stuck. And I don't mean insider information. I think you get 5 to 10 years for that. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is someone who you can call and say, hey, we submitted our proposal and we haven't heard anything. And then that individual, that SBLO, that small business representative, can then go to that department and say, hey, where are we at with that? Are we still in selection committee? Are we still here? Where are we at? Has the determination been made? That's a relationship, right? A relationship doesn't always equate to, okay, sign here. So you have to separate those two. But I would tell the writer there, I would say, if I'm new to governmental contracting, I want to find my softest target. I'm a military guy, so I talk about targets and target-rich environments and all that. But we want to find someone who's receptive to our calling, right? And it may not be a structured solicitation. It may be something that we do that we can offer to an agency directly and say, hey, you know what? I specialize in training or consulting, and here's a program I would love to show you, and then just do just send a proposal to that agency, knowing that they're receptive to it. You can get pretty far as a micro company just doing that.
Thank you, Andre. We are pretty much up on time now. So if you did not get your question answered, we are going to follow up with an email tomorrow with a copy of the recording and the slides. And like we mentioned, Andre is one of our subject matter experts that does consulting with us. So if you are interested in setting up a meeting, you can register for consulting with us. But then also, like Susie said, there are 15 centers around the state that you can work with your local center as well that have some great people to work with. So you can find your local center if you just go to coloradosbdc.org. They have a map and it'll show you where your local center is. But Andre does some work in other areas too. So we're happy to get you connected, or he'll do some short answering your questions too if you need that. Like I said, we'll follow up with some of this information. Susie, do you have any closing things you'd like to say?
No, just thanks everyone for attending. Andre, thank you as always. It's so nice to see you and hear your voice again. And we'll see everyone soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.